At just 22, Amelia Davis found herself on the brink of inheriting a $120 million tech empire from her grandfather, George Richardson. What should have been the happiest day of her life, however, quickly turned into a nightmare. Her mother, Elaine, and her new husband, Arthur, immediately tried to seize control of the family business, pressuring Amelia to choose between her inheritance and her home. The betrayal stung deeply, especially since George had been the only father figure in her life after her real father, Michael, tragically passed away when she was just 10. Growing up, George had always been there for her, offering unwavering support when her mother, though grieving, turned her attention elsewhere, leaving Amelia to grow up under George's guidance at his sprawling estate. George, a self-made mogul who started his company, Richardson Innovations, in a modest garage, had spent his life building an empire that was now worth millions. Amelia, having been raised in the company's halls, was the perfect heir, but when her mother remarried, her stepfather, Arthur, quickly became obsessed with gaining control of Richardson Innovations. His polished demeanor and charming personality masked his true intentions: to exploit George's legacy for his own gain. Amelia never could have predicted that her own mother would side with Arthur, choosing his ambition over the bond they had shared for years. But George had anticipated this betrayal, setting a plan in motion to ensure that Amelia would rise to the challenge. Even if it meant facing the hardest battle of her life, Amelia was still in shock as her grandfather's words echoed in the room. The overwhelming sense of responsibility hit her all at once. George had always been her mentor, her protector, but now, the weight of his legacy rested on her shoulders. At that moment, the cheers from the crowd seemed distant, almost surreal, as her mother's expression shifted from surprise to something darker: anger, disbelief, and a hint of betrayal. Arthur, on the other hand, didn't even try to mask his fury. His face turned an unhealthy shade of red, and his jaw tightened as if he could physically rip the announcement from the air. Amelia could feel the eyes of the executives who had watched her grow up, their expressions mixed with admiration, but also uncertainty. Would they truly accept her as the leader they once saw as the granddaughter of the company's founder? Her family's reaction confirmed that her grandfather had made a bold choice, one that would not be easily accepted, even by those closest to her. "Richard, this is quite unexpected." Her mother's voice broke through the tension, forced and tight. "Shouldn't we discuss something this important in private?" Her attempt at maintaining the appearance of control only revealed her shock and anger more clearly. But George stood firm, unwavering in his decision. "There's nothing to discuss, Catherine. The papers are already signed," he said calmly, his gaze now fixed on Arthur. Amelia's heart sank. She could see the rage in Arthur's eyes. This was not how he had envisioned taking control of the company. But George had outplayed him. He had seen through Arthur's scheming long before anyone else had. As the evening wore on, Amelia signed document after document, feeling the weight of each one like a heavy anchor. The $120 million company, its employees, and its future were now hers to manage. But as she signed the last page, her mother's bitter words echoed in her mind. "You don't know what you're doing. You're not ready for this," Elaine had said, her voice laced with disdain. Amelia was determined to prove her wrong. Grandpa had never pressured her to take over. Instead, he had always let her make her own choices. She had learned everything from him, and it was time for her to take her place as the new leader of Richardson Innovations. However, the true challenge was just beginning. Arthur would not accept defeat easily, and he would stop at nothing to take what he believed was rightfully his. Amelia knew that her first test would not be managing the company. It would be surviving the betrayal from the people she once trusted most. As the party continued, she stole a glance at George. He was watching her closely, but there was a sense of quiet pride in his eyes. He had prepared her for this moment. Now it was her turn to prove she could handle it. As Amelia navigated the chaos created by her mother and stepfather, she soon realized that George had been preparing for this moment long before the storm had hit. Since the day Arthur had entered their lives, George had grown increasingly wary of the man's intentions. Arthur had carefully woven himself into their family, quickly winning over Elaine with his charm, while his eyes remained fixed on the company's future. Amelia had noticed the calculating look he gave her grandfather, always asking pointed questions about the company and its future, yet never once showing interest in her or the family's history. Despite George's growing suspicions, Elaine remained blind to Arthur's true nature. To her, Arthur was the perfect man to fill the void left by her late husband. Yet, Amelia saw right through the facade. She couldn't understand how her mother, a woman who had once been devoted to their family, could now be so easily manipulated by a man like Arthur. Amelia, on the other hand, had been raised with values of loyalty, integrity, and a deep respect for the family business. She had spent her formative years in the company, working alongside George, learning from him, and growing into a sharp businesswoman. But as Arthur's presence grew more dominant, it wasn't just the company at stake anymore, it was Amelia's very sense of belonging. With every move Arthur made to worm his way into the company's inner circle, Amelia felt more like an outsider in her own family. He began appearing uninvited at company functions, introducing himself as part of the family business and requesting confidential reports. He demanded to sit in on strategy meetings and started to undermine Amelia's authority. All while Elaine stood by, seemingly oblivious to the brewing storm. One day, while Amelia was reviewing quarterly reports with George, he leaned in and spoke the words that haunted her. "I'm not worried about the company, Amelia, I'm worried about you and your mother when I'm gone." George's concern was clear. He knew how vulnerable Elaine was to manipulation, especially from someone like Arthur. George had seen it all before in his long career, and he had already started putting safeguards in place to protect Amelia and the legacy of Richardson Innovations. But Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that, no matter how much George prepared, the battle ahead would be far more difficult than she ever imagined. Then, on her 22nd birthday, George made an announcement that would change everything. Surrounded by family and friends, George publicly announced that he was stepping down and transferring the majority of the company's ownership to Amelia. The room went silent, the air was thick with shock, but as George smiled proudly at her, Amelia knew this was the moment that would test everything she had learned. It was no longer just about business. It was about standing up for her family's legacy and proving that she was capable of leading Richardson Innovations into the future. No matter what Arthur and her mother threw her way, the following weeks were a blur for Amelia. Despite her newfound control over Richardson Innovations, her every move was shadowed by the tension at home and the growing hostility from Arthur and her mother. Arthur's reaction to losing control of the company was swift and unforgiving. He spent every moment scheming, attempting to insert himself into business meetings and demanding that he be recognized as a leader within the company. His actions weren't subtle. He was making moves to undermine Amelia at every turn. Even though George had set up legal safeguards to protect her, Arthur continued to push forward, spreading rumors and trying to gain favor with members of the board. Amelia's phone was constantly filled with messages from concerned executives, asking if they should take him seriously or wait for her to intervene. But the hardest part for Amelia wasn't dealing with Arthur's underhanded tactics. It was watching her mother's increasingly fractured reaction. Elaine, who had always been a complex figure in Amelia's life, seemed to shrink further into herself with each passing day. She had been manipulated by Arthur so thoroughly that it was impossible to tell where her loyalty truly lay. One moment, she would apologize for her actions, telling Amelia that she never meant to hurt her. The next, she would be defending Arthur's right to run the company, as if her own daughter wasn't capable of leading. Amelia struggled with these mixed messages. How could the woman who once held her hand through childhood betray her so easily? Through all of this, George stood as a pillar of strength. Despite his declining health, he remained sharp and fully involved in the company's operations, offering guidance whenever Amelia needed it. But he knew that there was only so much he could do. It was Amelia's time to prove that she could stand on her own. One evening, after another grueling board meeting where Arthur's influence had been felt in every corner of the room, George took Amelia aside. "You've been letting them walk all over you, Maddie," he said quietly. "I know you don't want to fight, but sometimes, you need to stand your ground." Amelia looked up at her grandfather, exhaustion written across her face. I don't want to tear the family apart. But it's like they're forcing me into this battle. They are, George replied, his voice firm. And you have a choice. You can let them take what's rightfully yours. Or you can stand up and fight. You are more than capable of leading this company. Never doubt that. In that moment, something clicked inside Amelia. Her grandfather was right. She had been letting Arthur and Elaine dictate her actions, trying to hold on to the pieces of the family that had once been whole. But that time was over. It was time for Amelia to stop being the passive observer and take charge. She wasn't just fighting for the company, she was fighting for her legacy. For everything George had worked so hard to build, and for the future of Richardson Innovations. Amelia straightened her shoulders. It's time to fight back, she said, determination settling over her like a protective shield. And I'm not backing down. The following morning, Amelia woke up with a new sense of resolve. After her conversation with George, she knew it was time to stop allowing Arthur and her mother to dictate the narrative of her life and her inheritance. She had been given a gift that very few people in the world would ever get. But it was quickly turning into a battleground, not just for the company, but for her identity. No longer would she be a passive player in her own future. It was time to fight for what was rightfully hers. Arthur's latest moves were even more aggressive than before. He had managed to sway several of the newer board members to his side, casting doubt on Amelia's ability to lead. He'd even begun making decisions on behalf of the company, acting as though he was already in charge. When Amelia tried to step in, she was met with resistance from both him and her mother, who, despite everything, seemed to be leaning toward his manipulative tactics. Her frustration grew as she watched Arthur spin his web around the company's operations. But deep down, she knew she had something more powerful than he could ever possess, her grandfather's legacy and the loyalty of the true employees of Richardson Innovations. Amelia spent that day gathering her thoughts and preparing for the upcoming board meeting. She knew she needed to be strategic, to present her case in a way that would leave no room for doubt. George had always been a step ahead, and now it was her turn to follow in his footsteps. She called on a few trusted allies from the company, including Susan, the CTO, and James, the CFO, to help her with the upcoming confrontation. Together, they spent hours reviewing the documents, ensuring that all the legal safeguards George had put in place were ready to be presented in front of the board. The night before the meeting, Amelia sat with George at his estate, preparing for the most important battle of her life. Tomorrow, it's not just about the company, George said as they sipped tea together. It's about proving to yourself that you can handle whatever comes your way. Remember, Maddie, this is your legacy now. The words echoed in Amelia's mind as she lay in bed that night. She wasn't just fighting for a company worth millions. She was fighting for her place in the world, for the trust her grandfather had placed in her, and for the future of Richardson Innovations. She couldn't afford to lose now. Not when she was so close to proving that she could lead with strength and integrity. The next day, as she walked into the boardroom, Amelia was ready. She had the documents, the evidence, and the resolve to stand her ground. No more hiding behind the shadows of her mother or Arthur. Today, she would prove that the company was hers to lead, and nothing would stand in her way. The day of the emergency board meeting arrived, and the tension in the air was palpable. Amelia walked into the boardroom, her heart racing, but her mind sharper than ever. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, going over every detail of the company's operations, reading through contracts, and meeting with trusted allies. But today was not just about defending her right to lead, it was about reclaiming her power, asserting her authority, and standing up to the people who had tried to undermine her at every turn. As Amelia entered, she was met with the cold, calculated gaze of Arthur, who had positioned himself at the head of the table as if he were already in control. Beside him, her mother sat, her face tight and unreadable. Amelia took her seat, deliberately keeping her posture straight, her hands steady as she set down the documents that would prove her right. She wasn't going to let Arthur manipulate her anymore. She was done being passive. This was her moment to take charge. "Let's begin," Arthur said with a smug smile, trying to mask the nervous energy bubbling beneath his surface. "We're here to discuss the leadership transition and the future of Richardson Innovations." I'm sure we can all agree that stability is crucial in times like these. Amelia, despite the storm swirling inside her, kept her voice even. I agree, she said, her eyes locking onto Arthur's. Stability is critical, but so is trust. And today, we're going to talk about that. About trust in leadership and the future direction of this company. She handed out folders to each board member. Inside were carefully compiled documents. All the evidence needed to expose Arthur's deceitful tactics. The first piece of information was an email Arthur had sent to a competitor, offering them confidential information in exchange for a position in their company. She watched as the room fell silent, the members flipping through the pages, their faces gradually changing from confusion to disbelief. Amelia continued, "These are just the beginning. I've also included records of Arthur's meetings with other business leaders, as well as his attempts to undermine the company from the inside." Arthur's face turned a deep shade of crimson. "This is ridiculous," he spat, attempting to regain control. "This is nothing but an attack on my character." But Amelia wasn't done. She moved to the next page, revealing further evidence of Arthur's attempts to sway board members and bring them over to his side. She detailed the meetings he had arranged without consulting her, where he had pitched himself as the new CEO, undermining Amelia's position. The documents were damning. Finally, Amelia turned to her mother. "You need to see this too, Mom," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Arthur has been playing us both, and I won't let him destroy what Grandpa built for me. For us." Elaine looked at the papers, her eyes filled with disbelief and regret. Arthur's charm had blinded her, but the truth was clear now. There was no denying what had been happening right under their noses. The board members were shocked, but there was no turning back now. Amelia's proof was irrefutable. "Arthur," she said, her voice steady, "you have no authority here. You've been manipulating us all. And it ends now." The room was silent, the weight of the situation settling in. The board members exchanged glances, their allegiance shifting. They had heard enough. The betrayal was exposed, and Amelia had won the battle, not just for the company, but for herself. It was clear now that she was in charge, and no one, not even Arthur, would take that from her. After the explosive board meeting, Amelia felt a strange mix of triumph and exhaustion. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, she truly felt in control. Arthur had been exposed for what he was, a manipulative opportunist. But the fallout had only just begun. Despite her victory in the boardroom, the tension between her and her mother remained unresolved. Elaine, still processing the shock of Arthur's betrayal, avoided eye contact with Amelia as they walked out of the meeting together. The coldness between them was palpable, and Amelia could feel the weight of her mother's disappointment hanging in the air. As the days passed, Amelia threw herself into the work at Richardson Innovations. She knew that her next challenge wasn't just securing her position, it was proving to the employees, clients, and shareholders that she was capable of leading the company with the same integrity and vision her grandfather had built it on. The first thing she did was call a company-wide meeting, addressing all employees to reassure them that despite the drama, the company's future was secure. Richardson Innovations was built on trust, innovation, and integrity, Amelia told the gathered employees, her voice steady and confident. "I know these past weeks have been difficult for all of us. But today, we move forward. We will continue to honor the legacy that George Richardson built, while embracing the future with new ideas and new leadership. I'm here to guide this company into the next chapter. And I believe, together, we will succeed." The response from the employees was cautiously optimistic. Some still doubted her youth and inexperience, but the support from longtime staff like Susan, the CTO, and James, the CFO, helped Amelia navigate the growing challenges. They were her allies in this, and she knew they would be instrumental in helping her prove herself as the new leader of Richardson Innovations. Meanwhile, Arthur's next move was becoming more apparent. Despite the legal victory in the boardroom, he wasn't going to give up so easily. Amelia knew he would try to undermine her at every turn, but she wasn't about to back down. She had already faced the worst betrayal, and now, she had to focus on fortifying the company's future, all while continuing to rebuild the relationships that had been strained by her mother's blind trust in Arthur. The most difficult part was, of course, her relationship with Elaine. The emotional weight of what had transpired between them was undeniable. Amelia couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, not just from Arthur, but from her own mother, who had allowed herself to be manipulated by him. Amelia was ready to fight for the company, but now she realized that the hardest battle she would face wasn't in the boardroom. It was healing the fracture within her own family. Her mother had a long road ahead of her in terms of understanding the gravity of her actions. And Amelia wasn't sure if reconciliation was even possible. But one thing was certain. Amelia was determined to succeed, not just as a business leader, but as the person her grandfather had believed in all along. She had learned that trust, once broken, was hard to repair, but Amelia wasn't one to give up. It was time to prove herself to everyone, especially to herself. Despite the shocking revelations and the subsequent fallout, Amelia understood that her journey had only just begun. The company was hers to lead, but the weight of that responsibility became heavier with each passing day. Arthur's actions had exposed a deeper flaw in the company's foundation, one that would take more than just legal victories and boardroom confrontations to resolve. The trust that had been broken, not only by Arthur but also by her own mother, was a challenge Amelia couldn't ignore. While the company's future was now secured, Amelia's personal battle had just begun. Elaine, still reeling from the truth of Arthur's manipulation, became a shadow of the woman she had once known. Amelia's mother's apology felt hollow, though it was clear she was trying to make amends. But Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that her mother had chosen Arthur over her, over the family legacy. The hurt lingered, clouding their every interaction. Elaine would call and apologize, but it never felt like enough. Amelia had never wanted to alienate her mother, but the reality was undeniable. The more time passed, the more Amelia realized that she could no longer wait for her mother's approval or apology. She had to continue forging her own path, even if it meant walking it alone for now. Her grandfather had raised her to be independent, to think for herself, and to make tough decisions when the time came. It was now Amelia's time to take full ownership of her life, her company, and her future. The company's success wasn't guaranteed, but Amelia had the resolve to make it work. As she focused on expanding Richardson Innovations' reach and strengthening the core values that had made the company great, the business began to gain momentum. Amelia's leadership style was different from George's, but it was effective. She relied on transparency, collaboration, and innovation to guide the company into the future. Yet, even as Amelia found herself gaining the respect of the company's executives and clients, the shadow of her family's betrayal loomed large. Arthur, now publicly disgraced and facing criminal charges, had failed in his mission to take over the company. But his departure left a scar, not only in the business but in Amelia's heart. She wondered if she would ever be able to heal the rift with her mother, or if the betrayal would forever color their relationship. As the months passed, Amelia's resolve only strengthened. She was no longer the uncertain young woman who had hesitated to lead. Now, she was the CEO of Richardson Innovations, determined to build a future that honored her grandfather's legacy while carving out her own. She knew that challenges would continue to arise, both in business and in her personal life, but she was ready to face them head-on. It was time to step into her own future, one that was free from the shadows of betrayal. As Amelia continued to settle into her role as the new CEO of Richardson Innovations, she realized that despite her initial triumph, the battle was far from over. Arthur's legal troubles were just the beginning. Even though he had been publicly disgraced and was facing criminal charges for his schemes, the ripples of his betrayal still echoed through the company. The lingering distrust among certain employees, the uncertainty among clients, and the skepticism from some board members about her ability to lead, all served as constant reminders that her authority was still in question. Amelia knew that the only way to truly solidify her position was to prove herself capable in the most tangible way possible, by leading the company through its next phase of growth and success. The employees who had supported her were watching, waiting to see if she could deliver on her promises. The board, despite formally recognizing her as CEO, still had lingering doubts. They had known George for decades, but Amelia was a new and untested leader. She could feel their eyes on her, the weight of their expectations heavy on her shoulders. One of her first major decisions as CEO was to push forward with an ambitious product launch that would showcase the company's strength and innovation. Richardson Innovations had long been a leader in tech, but under George's leadership, it had focused more on maintaining its established reputation rather than taking risks. Amelia knew that to secure the company's future, she had to break away from the old way of thinking. She decided to invest heavily in an enhanced cybersecurity platform, something that had been in development for years but had been put on the back burner during George's later years at the helm. The launch was a massive undertaking, requiring coordination across departments and a complete overhaul of the company's marketing strategy. Amelia worked closely with Susan, the CTO, and James, the CFO, to ensure that everything was in place. It wasn't easy. There were plenty of moments when Amelia questioned whether she was making the right choice, especially as the pressure from the board and clients mounted. But with each successful milestone, her confidence grew. When the platform was finally launched, the results exceeded everyone's expectations. Sales surpassed projections by 30%, and the product received rave reviews from both clients and industry experts. The launch not only demonstrated Richardson Innovations' ongoing relevance in the tech space but also solidified Amelia's position as a capable leader. As Amelia stood at the podium at the company's post-launch celebration, looking out at the employees who had once doubted her, she realized that she had accomplished more than just a successful product launch. She had proven to herself, and to the world, that she was more than capable of running the company her grandfather had built. But the road ahead wasn't without its challenges. Amelia knew there would be more obstacles, more betrayals, and more battles, but with the trust of her team and the foundation of Richardson Innovations behind her, she was ready for whatever came next. She was no longer the unsure young woman who had inherited a company. She was the leader who would shape its future. With the success of the product launch behind her, Amelia thought she had finally gained some much-needed breathing room. However, the business world, and her personal life, had a way of never allowing for true peace. Arthur's schemes were no longer a direct threat, but his influence had left deep scars in the company, and Amelia knew that there was still much work to be done to repair those wounds. What concerned her more, though, was the ongoing strain between her and her mother, Elaine. Despite their small steps toward reconciliation, the betrayal still lingered, and Amelia couldn't escape the feeling that things would never be the same between them. Elaine's recent actions had been more apologetic, but Amelia couldn't shake the resentment she still felt. For years, Elaine had prioritized her social life over her family, and it wasn't just Arthur's manipulation that had strained their relationship. It was a pattern of neglect that had been there long before Arthur entered the picture. While Elaine expressed remorse and tried to make amends, the trust between mother and daughter had been irreparably damaged. Amelia wasn't sure if she could forgive her mother fully, but she was willing to try. However, it would take time, and it would require more than just apologies. It would take action and a commitment to change that Elaine had yet to fully demonstrate. Amelia knew that she couldn't let her personal issues with her mother cloud her judgment when it came to running the company. The legacy of Richardson Innovations was too important, and she had worked too hard to rebuild the trust of her employees and clients. She couldn't allow family drama to interfere with the company's growth. As the weeks passed, Amelia focused on expanding Richardson Innovations' reach into new markets. She knew that in order to truly solidify her position as CEO, she needed to show the board and the industry that she could lead the company into the future. Amelia had big plans, investing in artificial intelligence, expanding their product offerings, and increasing the company's commitment to corporate social responsibility. She also wanted to focus on giving back to the community by supporting STEM education for underprivileged students, something that had always been close to her grandfather's heart. But as Amelia began to push forward with these plans, Arthur's shadow continued to loom large. Despite being out of the company, his influence persisted in subtle ways. Some former employees, still loyal to him, whispered behind her back, sowing seeds of doubt about her ability to lead. Even the media seemed determined to label her as young and inexperienced. questioning her ability to navigate the cutthroat world of tech leadership. Amelia knew that the true test of her leadership would come not from the challenges she faced in the office, but from the personal sacrifices she would have to make. If she wanted to truly move forward, she would need to confront her relationship with her mother head-on, deciding whether reconciliation was possible, or whether it was time to accept that some bonds could never fully be repaired. The road ahead was uncertain, but Amelia was prepared. She had already proven that she could handle betrayal, and now she was ready to prove that she could rebuild, both in her personal life and in the business world. With her grandfather's legacy in her hands, she would make sure that Richardson Innovations thrived, no matter what. Amelia's journey is a powerful reminder that life is filled with unexpected challenges and betrayals. But it's in those moments that we truly discover who we are. Betrayal, especially when it comes from those we love and trust, can shake us to the core, but it's how we respond that defines our future. Amelia faced not only the betrayal of her stepfather but also the painful reality of her mother's actions. Through all the heartache, she didn't crumble. She rose above the deceit, stayed true to herself, and fought for the company and legacy that were rightfully hers. The lesson here is clear. No matter how deep the betrayal, we have the strength to overcome it. Our past doesn't define us. Our actions in the face of adversity do. Amelia chose to confront the challenges head-on, using the pain as fuel to become a better leader, a stronger individual, and a person who understands the true value of trust, integrity, and resilience. In the end, it wasn't just about saving the company. It was about reclaiming her own power. To all of you watching, remember this. Don't let the actions of others steal your future. Stay strong, trust yourself, and never forget that you have the power to shape your own destiny. If you've faced betrayal or hardship, we'd love to hear your story in the comments. And if this journey resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories. Stay tuned for more lessons and moments of strength.